This video is the second part of America's Lost Metros, a series where I look at metro systems around the United States. You don't need to watch the first video to fully understand this one, but it's highly recommended. I wanted to announce that I have a Patreon now. If you'd like to support my channel or just help out a broke college student, go check it out. Okay, let's not waste any more time and get right into the video. When you think of the Sun Belt, you might think of great weather, beautiful landscapes, and the perfect place to settle down after retirement. Well, since I'm a cynical urbanist, I see it as a suburban hellscape displaying the worst of American urbanism. Either way, you can't deny that Phoenix is the heart of the Sun Belt, home to more than 1.6 million people and the fifth largest city in the United States. So you would think being the fifth largest city, it would have a robust transit network, right? Right? Despite being a small town of only 3,000 people in the 1890s, Phoenix had a streetcar line. This line would continue to grow with the city, eventually building 5 more lines. The city purchased the lines in 1925 and continued to operate them through the Great Depression, although one of these lines would be converted to bus service during this time. As we all know, urbanism began to shift in the United States after the Second World War, when we opted to build more spread out communities away from the city center. Phoenix began to switch its focus to buses to serve the fast-growing expansion of their suburbs, and in 1947 another streetcar line was shut down to be replaced with buses. Welcome back to your favorite show. Guess what happened? What do you think happened to the streetcars of Phoenix? A, they would be subsidized and continue to run. B, they would slowly be shut down and replaced with buses. Or C, a massive fire would wipe out the entire streetcar fleet. If you chose C, then good job, you're a winner. Was it a plot by General Motors to destroy streetcars and replace them with buses? According to the courts, apparently not. But despite how it happened, Phoenix was now left without most of its streetcars, and the lines were all converted to buses, leaving Phoenix without train service. That is until 1984, when the city drafted a plan to fund transit in the city. Eventually, 2 ballot measures would be created. A half-cent sale tax for highways and roads in 1985, and another half-cent sales tax for mass transit in 1989. Do you see the problem here? The 1985 bill was passed with no opposition, of course, and the other one, well, we'll get back to that. The planners wanted a system much like Vancouver's SkyTrain, so much so that they hired a designer of SkyTrain, Larry Miller, to plan the project in Phoenix. He decided to build elevated metro lines along the city's 4 busiest bus routes. The red line would go from Metro Center Mall through downtown to the airport in downtown Mesa. The yellow line would start at Paradise Valley Mall and connect with the red line and end in southern Phoenix. The green line would begin in downtown Glendale and connect the first 2 lines before heading to Scottsdale. The last route would connect the red and green lines along 44th Avenue. This system would be almost 70 miles in length, which would make it the 5th longest metro in the United States. And if the extensions that were planned were ever built on the line, it would be up to 110 miles in length, surpassing Chicago's L and boosting it to 4th. Along with this metro system, the bill also included increased bus service, a bus rapid transit route, and a commuter rail from Phoenix to Chandler. What an ambitious plan, and all for only a half-cent sale tax? What a steal! I sure hope that everyone else thought it was too. Oh, well, shit. The ballot was rejected almost 3-1, with many voters thinking that the ballot was a waste of tax money that would be better spent on freeways, which they already did, by the way. It would be almost 20 years later when Phoenix would finally open a rail system, a light rail line that would follow the planned red line. With multiple extensions to the system planned, it looks like Phoenix is starting to take rail seriously. But I think the plans are far too small for the massively growing city. It's interesting to think what Phoenix would look like had they built this system. Would Phoenix still be as sprawling as it is now, or would the metro encourage high-density growth around its stations? I guess we'll never know. Rochester, New York is the smallest city in North America to ever build a subway system, only having around 220,000 residents at the time of its construction, which is a higher population than today's Rochester. Unfortunately, it's also the only city to fully operate a subway system and then fully abandon it. So what happened for such a small city to get a subway and then abandon it? Well, our tale starts back in 1825 with the opening of the Erie Canal. This canal was the first navigable waterway to connect the Great Lakes and the Atlantic and was a major trade artery for New York and the surrounding states. The city of Rochester grew around the canal and was a major city along the route. By the early 20th century, a new canal had been built to accommodate larger and faster shipping traffic, making the old Erie Canal obsolete and ready for redevelopment. Just like the old canal in Cincinnati, planners thought to build a subway to consolidate interurban and train traffic into one modern subway. And so, construction began on the Rochester subway, which wouldn't open until 1927. The subway was 9 miles long with 15 stations, starting at Rowlands in the east through downtown to Driving Park Avenue in the west. If it existed today, it would be the shortest system in the United States, but surprisingly, it would still have more stations than some notable lines such as PATH or Baltimore Subway Link. It was thought that the subway would raise property value and bring economic development to the city. However, this wouldn't be the case. The late 1920s was already spelling the decline of interurbans and streetcars, especially in medium-sized cities just like Rochester. The Great Depression didn't help either, as no funding could be provided to update the already decaying tunnels and system. The outbreak of World War II led to widespread use of the system, with ridership peaking just after the war in 1947. However, the system started to lose money after wartime was over, and the arrival of expressways sealed the fate for the subway. The dwindling subway system would eventually be shut down in 1956. The eastern half of the subway would be demolished to make way for Interstates 490 and 590. The western half would continue to serve limited freight traffic up until the 90s, where the route would eventually be fully abandoned, where it continues to rot to this day. It's highly doubtful that the subway would still exist had anything changed. Even when it was built, it was criticized by locals for not being built in a dense enough area to support the system. If development did go up around the system, it's much more unlikely that it would have lasted at least a while longer. Now, Rochester, New York isn't home to any streetcars, subways, or anything of the sort. It makes you wonder just how different the city would be had the subway been maintained and developed. Atlanta has the 8th largest metro system in the United States, carrying 28 million passengers annually and on 4 lines connecting downtown to the rest of the city. But what if I told you that the funding for this line, built in the 70s, was meant for another city? A city that turned down $6 billion in today's money to build a metro system. And that city would be... It's 1918, and Seattle has a great streetcar network, just like every other city on this list. This was the year the city decided to purchase the private system for public use, but the city vastly overpaid for what they got. With this and other financial problems, the city couldn't afford the necessary upgrades to keep the system modernized. The system would slowly fall apart over the next 2 decades and finally be fully replaced with buses by 1941, much earlier than most other streetcar lines in the nation. The city wouldn't have any rail transit for another 2 decades, but change was coming. Could a new century bring Seattle into a new age? The Century 21 Exposition of 1962 showcased the future. Sleek space-age buildings, a race to the stars, and new modes of transportation. This innovation was the Monorail, a sleek and futuristic train that levitates off the ground. The Seattle Monorail was built for the occasion, shuttling people from downtown to the site of the fair. The fairgrounds would be turned into a science and entertainment district after the fair's conclusion, which would be operated by a private company, which included the monorail. This transition from fairground to entertainment district went smoothly at first, but after 2 years, the company started to lose a lot of money and sold the land and the monorail to the city. Around this time, a new movement in the city started to take shape. The Forward Thrust wanted to revitalize the city by funding parks, waste systems, and improving city services. At the helm of this movement was a proposed rapid transit network, connecting the Seattle area with modern rapid transit. The system composed of 2 routes, the eastern route from Crown Hill in the north through downtown to Spokane, Boeing Field, and ending in Renton's Boeing plant. The other western line would start in Sheridan to the University of Washington before traveling downtown and then along I-90 to Mercer Island, where it would branch off north to Bellevue and Northup Way, and south to Eastgate. The system would be around 45 miles long, which would be the 6th longest in the United States, which funnily enough would put it just behind MARTA, which has 47 miles of track. While the other bills such as fire protection, a multi-purpose stadium which would become the Kingdome, and arterial highways would pass easily, the rapid transit proposition wasn't as popular among voters, who saw the Forward Thrust Commission as nothing more than rich businessmen using the city's money for some passion projects. The federal government was willing to cover the majority of the cost of the system had the bill gone through. The first iteration of this bill was split evenly, with the no's getting 49% and the yes getting 51%. Although the yes bill got a slim majority, the bill needed 60% of the vote for it to become law. The second iteration of the bill was voted on in 1970, where the no's outweighed the yeses 54 to 46% respectively. With the Forward Thrust Initiative losing steam, the federal government gave the funds it would have given to Seattle to a much more eager Atlanta to build a metro system of its own. The Forward Thrust movement led to a push for more public input on big projects in the city. The most prominent law to come from this era was the Citizens' Initiatives, which allowed groups with enough support to push laws onto the city ballot. This will come up later. But for now, the only thing Seattle has done is build a metro tunnel with cannery wires. Oh, that's pretty cool. So we're getting a metro system. Where are the trains? We did buy the trains, right? They did not buy the trains. So the city had to buy expensive, specially built buses to use the tunnel instead. A new agency, Sound Transit, was formed in 1993 to provide rapid transit for the Seattle area. The agency was planning on building a light rail system using the bus tunnel as its downtown hub, and eventually in 1996, voters approved a 25-mile light rail system that would convert the bus tunnel to a train one. There was one problem though, and that problem would be Seattle's old monorail and a cab driver named Dick Falconberry. Falconberry wanted Seattle to extend its two-stop monorail system into a region-wide service, and many enthusiasts took to his plan. Thanks to Seattle's new Citizens Initiative law, all he needed was a large enough group to get his proposition on the ballot, and it worked. The monorail proposition got onto the 1997 ballot, and to the dismay of engineers and politicians alike, the vote won 53-47. The plan known as Initiative 41 proposed two new monorail lines across the city. The first would start at 140th and travel south, crossing the Aurora Bridge to the Seattle Center, where it would then use the existing track to the downtown station before traveling south on Rainier Avenue to Rainier Beach. The other line would start at 145th and Lake City Way, traveling south to the University of Washington and downtown, where it would travel above 4th Avenue to the Kingdome, and then take the West Seattle Bridge to 35th Street, where it would run to Roxbury Street. There was one huge problem with Initiative 41 though: the funding. The initiative was to be fully funded by a mix of private investors and farebox revenue, which the plan had neither. Another vote took place with the struggling plan as costs went up and funding was nowhere in sight. Several more attempts to build the monorail were submitted, but none had the funding to build the system. The planned monorail, after being shrunk down to a single 10-mile line, was rejected almost 2-1, so the planners finally threw in the flag and called it quits. At the same time, Sound Transit was attempting to build the light rail it promised in the 90s, but with considerable complications, the completed line finally opened in 2009. The system is seeing some major construction with extensions on the first line, and construction of a second line is currently underway. With all the complications of building a transit network that the city has faced, it seems like the city is finally getting the transit network that it deserves. Thank you everyone for listening to me rant about trains for almost 10 minutes, or however long the video is gonna be. It means a lot to me, and I'm still amazed at how well the first video did. There are still more lost metros, so if you'd like to see a part 3, tell me in the comments below. Subscribe to my Patreon if you'd like to support the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.